What would you do if you discovered that the most terrible legends of your region had a real basis? Imagine a thick fog over the endless swamps of Mississippi, where every sound is absorbed by the viscous silence, and rare rays of the sun barely penetrate through the tangle of cypresses and Spanish moss. It is here, in this forgotten corner of America at the turn of the 20th century, that a story unfolded so chilling that even after 100 years, locals refuse to speak of it aloud. The story of the LeClaire family is a bloody saga revealing the darkest depths of human nature, where isolation and survival give rise to unimaginable horrors. If you enjoy such historical investigations, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. We will continue to uncover the most disturbing secrets of the past that remain hidden from the general public. It all began on a stuffy August day in 1905. A young county doctor, Thomas Sheffield, recently arrived from Boston, received a strange assignment from the local sheriff. He was required to examine some remains found by a passing preacher deep in the swamp, in an area where locals never dared to appear after nightfall. Sheffield, a man of science and a skeptic by nature, approached the task with professional curiosity, unaware that this investigation would change not only his career, but also his very understanding of what humans are capable of. The swamp trail leading deep into the delta became narrower and more impassable with each step. The air was heavy with the smell of rotting vegetation and stagnant water. Sheffield, accompanied by the sheriff and two of his deputies, advanced slowly, struggling to move his feet in the viscous mud. When the group finally reached the site, the sun was already setting, painting the swamp in ominous shades of red. "What I saw there defies description in terms of medical science," Sheffield later wrote in his diary, now kept in the county library archive. Partially submerged in silt lay not merely human remains, but something that had clearly been worked on by human hands. The bones had been stripped of flesh with surgical precision, and some showed saw marks resembling those that he had seen in butcher shops. But what struck Sheffield most was not the remains themselves, but the items scattered around. Children's shoes, various articles of clothing that clearly belonged to different people, and, most disturbingly, a small porcelain doll with a broken head, half submerged in the mud. It was not just the discovery of a dead body, Sheffield continued. It was a place where people disappeared, whole families. That evening, after the findings were carefully documented and packaged for further investigation, the sheriff first mentioned a name that would soon become synonymous with horror: LeClaire. "They live there in the very depths of the swamp," he said quietly, pointing to a barely discernible path leading further into the mire. "No one enters their territory. Those who have tried have not returned." The LeClaire family, as Sheffield later discovered from scant records in the town archives, had settled in these parts before the Civil War. Their ancestors, French settlers from Louisiana, sought solitude and found it in the impenetrable swamps of the Mississippi Delta. Over decades of isolation, the family grew but remained a closed system. They did not accept outsiders and married only among themselves, creating increasingly close blood ties. According to municipal records found in the county archives, the LeClaires rarely appeared in town, only to sell their products: furs, herbs, and what they called special game. In the records of a tax inspector from 1887, it is mentioned, the LeClaire family submitted meat products of undetermined origin for taxation, due to the strange appearance and smell of the goods. Inspection rejected. Trade permitted under the personal responsibility of buyers. Of particular interest is a note in the diary of a local doctor from 1775. "Today I examined a child from the L family brought to town with a high fever. In addition to the fever, I discovered signs of profound physical and possibly mental degeneration. Abnormal skull structure, curvature of the spine, clear signs of mental retardation. At the same time, the child's teeth had strange characteristics. All were sharpened like those of a predator." The mother explained this as a family tradition, refusing further explanation. The more Sheffield delved into the archival records, the more disturbing a picture emerged before him. Over the past 30 years, no fewer than 47 cases of people disappearing had been recorded in the county, travelers, traders, and entire families passing through these parts. Official reports attributed the disappearances to the dangers of the swamps, wild animals, or bandits. But when Sheffield plotted the last known locations of the missing persons on a map, he discovered an ominous pattern. They all formed a circle centered on the presumed location of the Leclerc estate. What at first seemed like a random coincidence now appears to me as a system, Sheffield wrote in his report to the sheriff. The disappearances are not chaotic. They follow a certain logic, as if someone is methodically clearing the territory of random witnesses. The sheriff, a practical and cautious man, was in no hurry to draw conclusions. "Doctor, you've come from a big city and don't know our parts," he told Sheffield. "The swamp takes people every year. Getting lost here means never being found. But I can't ignore your findings. We will organize an expedition to the Leclercs, but prepare for the worst." The expedition, consisting of the sheriff, his 6 deputies, Dr. Sheffield, and 2 local guides, set out early in the morning of August 15th, 1905. The guides, the Tizot brothers, the only ones in the county who knew the way to the Leclercs, were somber and taciturn. "We will show you the way," said the elder brother, "but don't force us to enter their land. The Leclercs have eyes and ears everywhere the swamp grass grows." The journey took 2 full days. The trail, barely discernible even to an experienced eye, meandered between rotting snags, sometimes disappearing completely underwater. The travelers spent the night on a small islet, where the Tizot brothers insisted on maintaining a bonfire until dawn. "They hunt at night," explained the younger brother, refusing to specify who he meant. On the 2nd day of the journey, the landscape began to change. The swamp became drier, and the vegetation less dense. By noon, the group reached relatively solid ground, a sort of peninsula surrounded on 3 sides by impassable mire. Here, the Tizot brothers stopped. "Their territory is beyond this point," said the elder. "We will wait for you here. If you don't return before sunset, we will leave." What appeared before the eyes of the expedition when they crossed the last rise seemed like a mirage arising from the swamp mist. In the middle of this wild, God-forsaken area lay something that could be called a settlement. About a dozen shacks built of swamp cypress and clay, arranged in a semicircle around a central, larger structure. Around the settlement were cleared areas of land where, apparently, some crops were grown. But what struck the expedition most were the numerous sheds located some distance from the residential buildings. Sturdy, solid structures with massive doors locked with heavy locks. "The first thing that struck me in the Leclerc settlement was the smell," Sheffield later wrote. "Not the usual smell of rural life, which I had grown accustomed to in my travels around the area, but something completely different. A sweetish, heavy aroma, reminiscent of both a smokehouse and a morgue. This smell seemed to permeate the very earth." The arrival of the expedition did not go unnoticed. People began to emerge from the shacks, strange, silent figures with physical characteristics that Dr. Sheffield immediately noted as signs of years of inbreeding. Disproportionately large heads, crooked limbs, protruding jaws. Adults and children, all of them looked at the newcomers with the same expression. Not fear or surprise, but cold, assessing interest. From the central house came a woman whose appearance caused the other Leclercs to respectfully step aside. Tall, erect, despite her obviously advanced age, she moved with the confidence of a person accustomed to unquestioning obedience. This was Marie-Helene Leclerc, the matriarch of the family, as Sheffield later discovered. She had the eyes of a person who had seen everything and feared nothing, he recalled. When she spoke, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air temperature. "You are lost, gentlemen?" Marie-Helene asked in a strange mixture of English and Creole. "The road through the swamp is dangerous for those who don't know the way. Many have disappeared trying to find a shortcut." The sheriff introduced himself and explained the purpose of the visit: the investigation of the findings in the swamp and the disappearances of people. Marie-Helene listened with an impassive face, then slowly surveyed the sheriff's armed deputies. "We live here by our labor, far from the world that has rejected us," she said. "If you found bones in the swamp, that's not our concern. The swamps are full of dangers. And now, if you don't mind, we have a lot of work to do." But the sheriff, emboldened by the presence of his men, insisted on inspecting the estate. "This is an official investigation, ma'am," he said, placing his hand on his holster. "We will inspect all the buildings and the grounds." What followed, Sheffield described as a methodical descent into the abyss of human horror. At first, the search revealed nothing special. Simple, sparsely furnished dwellings, food supplies, tools common to rural areas. But when the expedition reached the remote sheds, reality surpassed the most terrible assumptions. The first shed, the door of which had to be broken down, turned out to be a kind of workshop. Inside were tables made of durable wood on which lay tools that struck Sheffield with their specialization. Saws of various sizes, knives with curved blades, hooks, tongs, and other implements resembling those used by butchers. But the sizes and shapes of some of the tools clearly indicated that they were intended for working with something much larger than ordinary game. The tools were worn from long use but kept impeccably clean, Sheffield noted. Each knife was razor-sharp, each saw lubricated. This was not a random collection but the set of a professional proud of his craft. But the real horror awaited the expedition in the second shed, when the heavy door opened. Even the battle-hardened sheriff's deputies recoiled, unable to bear the sight that unfolded. Inside was what could only be described as a storage facility. A large room with a stone floor and walls along which stretched shelves. On these shelves, neatly arranged and labeled, lay human remains, bones, skulls, and what were undoubtedly dried organs. In the center of the room stood a massive table over which hung hooks attached to the ceiling beams. The floor under the table was slightly sloped toward a central drain. This was a processing site, Sheffield later wrote in his report, which remained classified for many years, a place where people were turned into product. But the most terrifying discovery awaited them in the third shed. Here, in the cool, semi-darkness of a room equipped with a primitive but effective ventilation system, hung dozens of carcasses prepared for consumption, parts of human bodies treated with salt and smoke. Some were packed in burlap, ready for transportation. On each package was a mark, a simple symbol resembling the letter L, with an additional stroke. "This symbol," explained one of the sheriff's deputies who grew up in these parts, "I have seen on meat products that the Leclercs sold in town. Their special game was always valued for its tenderness and special taste." In the fourth shed, the expedition discovered what the sheriff called a museum of horrors. A room filled with the personal belongings of the victims. Clothing, jewelry, toys, books, and other items that apparently served as a kind of trophy. Each item was neatly displayed, as in a museum exhibit. Particularly disturbing was the abundance of children's items. Little dresses, shoes, dolls, and stuffed animals. This was not a random accumulation, Sheffield wrote, but a carefully organized collection speaking to the pride of the collector. Some items clearly belonged to people from the upper echelons of society. Expensive watches, exquisite jewelry, books in foreign languages. This indicated that the victims were not only simple travelers, but also representatives of affluent classes. In the fifth and final shed were written records of the Leclerc family's crimes. Dozens of diaries and notebooks written in a strange mixture of English and Creole. These documents, as it turned out during their study, contained detailed records of each victim. The date, place of capture, the amount of product obtained, as well as an assessment of quality. Some entries contained methodical observations about the most effective ways to process and preserve human meat, as well as recipes for preparing various parts of the body. The most disturbing aspect of these records, Sheffield noted, was their ordinariness. They were kept with the meticulousness of accounting books, without a shadow of doubt about the legitimacy of the actions. For the authors of these diaries, hunting people was simply a family business passed down from generation to generation. Particular attention was drawn to a diary dated 1855 and apparently belonging to the founder of the dynasty, Jean-Baptiste Leclerc. It described how, during a particularly severe famine caused by flooding, the family first resorted to cannibalism, killing a hunter who accidentally wandered into their territory. The hunger passed, and we realized that God had shown us the way. The entry read, "From now on, we will never go hungry, for around us there is always food that comes to our table itself." What was even more horrifying, the diaries showed how, over the years, what began as an act of desperation turned into a way of life, and then into a belief system. The Leclercs created their own perverted philosophy justifying their actions. They considered themselves to be higher predators and all other people simply a more complex form of prey. This philosophy was passed on to children from an early age, shaping generations for whom hunting people was the norm. When the expedition returned to the residential buildings, the atmosphere in the settlement had changed. The Leclercs, realizing that their secret was out, shifted from wariness to open hostility. The women took the children into the houses, and the men, armed with guns and knives, took up defensive positions. Marie-Helene Leclerc, the matriarch of the family, stood on the threshold of the main house with an expression of cold resolve on her face. "You think you can judge us?" she asked when the sheriff announced that all members of the family were under arrest. "We survived here when your world forgot us. We did what we had to do, and now you come with your laws and morals. It's too late, Mr. Sheriff, too late." What followed was described in the sheriff's official report as the forced use of force against armed resistance. In reality, as Sheffield later admitted, it was a slaughter caused by fear and revulsion. 5 Leclerc men were killed in the shootout, 3 were wounded and captured. Women and children were arrested without resistance, with the exception of Marie-Helene, who, according to the official version, committed suicide, preferring death to arrest. The unofficial version, mentioned by Sheffield in his personal diary, says that Marie-Helene was shot by one of the sheriff's deputies when she tried to retrieve something from under a floorboard in her house. That something turned out to be a box containing dozens of human teeth, many of which, judging by their size, belonged to children. In total, 37 living members of the family were found in the Leclerc settlement. Men, women, and children of different ages. All of them were taken to town for trial. Adults capable of understanding their actions were sentenced to death or life imprisonment. Younger children were sent to orphanages and foster families, where their true origins were kept a closely guarded secret. But the most disturbing aspect of the whole case, Sheffield wrote in his final report, was the reaction of the Leclerc children to the arrest. They showed neither fear nor remorse. For them, life in the settlement, with all its horrors, was the only known reality. Some of the older children expressed pride in their hunting skills and did not understand why their actions were considered criminal. Particularly telling was the case of 14-year-old Paul Leclerc, who, while in custody, calmly explained to Sheffield the intricacies of the family craft. "We don't kill just for the sake of it," the boy said with a sincere lack of understanding of the problem. "We use everything. Nothing goes to waste. Isn't that what God teaches? To use all the gifts of His creation." Records of the interrogations of adult family members showed that the system of cannibalism practiced by the Leclercs was not just a way of survival but a complex social structure with its own rituals, hierarchy, and division of labor. Men were responsible for hunting, tracking, and capturing victims. Women were engaged in processing, turning human bodies into product. Children were involved in the process from an early age, starting with simple tasks and gradually learning all aspects of the terrible family business. A special role was played by the matriarch of the family, Marie-Helene Leclerc, who, according to the testimony, had absolute power over all members of the clan. It was she who decided who would be the next victim, how to distribute the product, and what part of it to send for sale to the town. According to one of the arrested men, "Grandma knew everything about people. What parts are best for eating, what parts are best for selling, and how to make the meat last longer." The trade in human meat disguised as special game was an important part of the Leclerc family's economy. According to investigators, over the years of their activity, they sold no less than 2 tons of human meat in nearby towns, receiving significant profits for it. These funds were used to purchase weapons, tools, and other necessary goods that they could not produce themselves. One of the most shocking aspects of the case was the discovery of a network of Leclerc accomplices in nearby towns. Traders who knew or suspected the true nature of the meat they were selling but turned a blind eye to it because of the high profits. "Some people are willing to ignore even the most terrible crimes if it benefits them," Sheffield bitterly noted. The trial of the Leclerc family, which began in November 1905, was closed to the public and the press. The authorities feared mass hysteria if the details of the case became public knowledge. The official version presented to the public spoke of serial murders and numerous crimes, without mentioning cannibalism and the trade in human meat. 8 adult men and 6 women were sentenced to death by hanging. 7 women and 4 elderly men received life sentences. Children over 15 were sent to correctional facilities, younger ones to orphanages and foster families. The execution of the condemned Leclercs took place at dawn on February 15, 1906, in the courtyard of the county jail. According to witnesses, none of the condemned expressed remorse or fear of death. The last words of Jacques Leclerc, the eldest of the surviving men, were, "You can kill us, but you will not kill our blood. It is already flowing throughout the South. We will return." These words proved prophetic in an unexpected sense. Subsequent investigation showed that over the decades, some members of the Leclerc family had left the swamp and integrated into society under various names. They started families, had children, and outwardly led normal lives. But did they maintain contact with the main clan? Did they continue to follow the terrible family traditions? These questions remained unanswered. According to data from the archives of the County Psychiatric Hospital, where some of the Leclerc children were placed, their adaptation to normal life proved virtually impossible. Subject L, 12-year-old girl, continues to exhibit cannibalistic tendencies. Reads one of the entries dated 1909. Despite 3 years of intensive therapy, she considers the consumption of human flesh natural and does not understand why it is prohibited. At the same time, she demonstrates high intelligence and the ability to learn. Of particular interest is the case of Emma Leclerc, a 16-year-old girl who was found sane and sent to a women's prison instead of a psychiatric hospital. In 1911, she escaped under mysterious circumstances. The door to her cell was found open, and the guard on duty that night disappeared without a trace. Despite extensive searches, Emma was never found. "We must assume the worst-case scenario," Sheffield wrote in his letter to the sheriff after Emma's escape. "If she has returned to the swamp and found those who escaped our attention, the traditions of the family may be revived. The swamps hold many secrets, and we cannot be sure that we have found all the Leclercs." His fears proved well-founded. In the period from 1912 to 1920, no fewer than 20 more cases of people disappearing were recorded in the county. Significantly fewer than in the years of the Leclerc clan's active operation, but still alarmingly high for a region with a low population density. Most of the missing were lone travelers, vagrants, or seasonal workers, people whose disappearance was unlikely to trigger a large-scale investigation. In 1922, an incident occurred that again drew the authorities' attention to the swamps. A group of hunters, lost in the delta, stumbled upon a small hut built on stilts over the water. Inside, they discovered what they described as a devil's lair. Walls decorated with human bones, a collection of skulls, and a barrel of salt in which human limbs were stored. The owner of the hut was not found, but it was obvious from the belongings left behind that he had recently been there. An organized search expedition yielded no results. The swamp seemed to have swallowed the mysterious recluse. However, one of the guides involved in the search claimed to have seen a woman with long gray hair who was watching the group from the thickets. "She was smiling," he said, "smiling as if we were not people but cattle in a pasture." By the 1930s, the Leclerc case gradually began to pass into the realm of local legends. A new generation of county residents knew about the Cannibal family only from the stories of old-timers. Many considered the story exaggerated or completely fictional. Documents related to the investigation were classified and placed in a special archive, access to which was limited to senior officials. However, in 1937, an event occurred that made many remember the Leclercs. In the small town of Pinewood, located 60 miles from the swamps, a butcher shop owner, Robert Johnson, was arrested on suspicion of murder. In the basement of his house, police found the remains of 3 vagrants who, according to neighbors, had stopped at Johnson's seeking work but were never seen leaving his house. During interrogation, Johnson confessed not only to these murders but also to the fact that for 5 years he had been mixing human meat into his regular products. "I learned the recipe from an old woman in the swamps," he said. "She taught me how to choose the right people and how to process the meat so that it would be tender. She said it was a family tradition." Further investigation revealed that Johnson regularly made trips to the swamp, where, according to him, he met with an elderly woman named Emma, who claimed to belong to an ancient lineage of true predators. Police organized a new expedition to the area indicated by Johnson but found neither the woman nor any signs of human presence. Johnson was declared insane and placed in a psychiatric hospital, where he died just 2 months later, officially from a heart attack. However, a nurse working at the hospital later claimed that on the night of Johnson's death, she saw a tall figure in long clothing in the corridor leading to his ward. "She moved like a shadow," the nurse said, "and in the morning, we found Johnson dead with an expression of horror on his face." Over time, the Mississippi Delta changed. The draining of swamps for agricultural purposes, the construction of roads, and the development of infrastructure gradually turned the once impassable wilderness into a more accessible area. By the 1950s, many areas previously known only to local guides became accessible to ordinary people. However, there remained areas where even experienced hunters and fishermen still did not dare to venture. One such area, known among locals as Hungry Swamp, was located approximately in the area of the former LeClaire settlement. "There's no game there," old hunters explained to young ones. "Neither bird nor beast. Everything alive avoids this place." In 1968, a group of students from the University of Louisiana, researching the folklore of the South, became interested in the legend of the swamp cannibals. Lacking access to official documents, they relied on the oral accounts of local residents and old newspaper articles in which the LeClaire case was mentioned only in passing, without details. Intrigued by the conflicting versions of the story, 3 students, Michael Brooks, Jennifer Collins, and David Ramirez, decided to go to the swamp to find the remains of the LeClaire settlement and take photographs for their research. Despite the warnings of local residents, on June 15, 1968, they rented a boat and ventured deep into the delta. 5 days later, when the students had not returned or made contact, a search operation was organized. Their boat was found overturned in one of the channels, 1 mile from the supposed location where the LeClaire settlement once stood. The students' personal belongings, backpacks, cameras, notebooks, remained in the boat, but they themselves were not found despite extensive searches. The only clue was a roll of film found in one of the cameras. After developing it, photos of the swamp, the boat, and the students themselves, taken during the first days of the expedition, were discovered. The last frames showed the remains of some structures barely distinguishable among the overgrown vegetation, and a strange figure in the background, a blurred silhouette that many interpreted as a trick of the light and shadow. But some claimed it was a person watching the photographers. The case of the missing students revived interest in the LeClaire story. Articles speculating on the possible survival of members of the Cannibal clan or their descendants appeared in the press. Some journalists linked the LeClaires to other unexplained disappearances that had occurred in the region over the decades. In 1977, historian Alan Parker gained access to previously classified documents about the LeClaire case and published the book Hunger in the Swamps, the story of the LeClaire family. The book, based on official reports, the diaries of Dr. Sheffield, and witness testimonies, presented the public with a complete and shocking picture of the Cannibal clan's crimes. The publication sparked a wave of public interest and new attempts to explore the swamp in search of traces of the LeClaires. Most of these expeditions returned empty-handed. Decades of natural changes, flooding, and rampant vegetation had erased almost all physical traces of the settlement. However, some adventurers claimed to have seen strange figures watching them from the thickets, or heard unusual sounds resembling human voices where there should have been no people. In the 1980s, with the development of agriculture and infrastructure, much of the swamp in the area of the former LeClaire settlement was drained. Farms and small settlements appeared on the site of what had once been impassable marshes. It seemed that the dark history had finally retreated before the progress of civilization. However, strange incidents continued. Farmers complained of unexplained livestock losses. Animals disappeared without a trace, and were sometimes found partially butchered with surgical precision. Some residents of the new settlements reported seeing strange figures on the outskirts of their properties, especially at dusk and dawn. In 1992, an incident occurred that many linked to the LeClaire legacy. The Thornton family, husband, wife, and 2 children, moved into a newly built house on the edge of the area that old-timers still called Hungry Swamp. 3 months after moving in, all members of the family disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Police, called by concerned relatives, found the house empty, with no signs of a struggle or hasty departure. The table was set for dinner, with food untouched on the plates. All of the family's personal belongings, including documents and valuables, remained in their places. The only strange thing was an inscription on the bathroom mirror, apparently written in lipstick. "They came back for us." Despite extensive searches, the Thornton family was never found. This disappearance, along with other unexplained incidents, gave rise to a new wave of rumors about the possible survival of the LeClaire descendants, who continue to follow the sinister traditions of their ancestors. In the early 2000s, anthropologist Sarah Johnson, specializing in the study of isolated communities, became interested in the LeClaire story from a scientific point of view. She conducted a study of genealogical records and discovered that some lines of the family had indeed integrated into society even before the crimes of the main clan were revealed. According to my estimates, Johnson wrote in her research, there may currently be between 1,000 and 10,000 people in the United States who have a direct genetic relationship with the LeClaire family. Most of them probably do not suspect their origins, as their ancestors changed their names and concealed their history. However, the most alarming aspect of Johnson's research was the discovery that some of the LeClaire descendants may have maintained contact with each other and, possibly, knowledge of their origins. Analysis of marriage records shows an unusually high frequency of marriages between certain families originating from the Mississippi Delta region, she noted. This may be a coincidence, but it may also indicate a conscious maintenance of kinship ties, characteristic of closed communities. In 2010, a chef at one of New Orleans' elite restaurants was arrested on suspicion of using human meat in his dishes. The investigation revealed that he was acquiring the special meat from a supplier who picked it up from a remote area of the Delta. The supplier, arrested shortly after the chef, committed suicide in his holding cell, leaving a note. "You don't understand. They are everywhere. They will find me even here." Laboratory tests of the meat seized from the restaurant gave mixed results. It was officially stated that the meat was from exotic animals imported illegally. However, some sources in law enforcement anonymously reported that the tests showed a match to human DNA. In 2015, anthropologist Sarah Johnson, who continued her research on the descendants of the LeClaires, disappeared without a trace during an expedition to the former Hungry Swamp area. Her car was found parked on the side of a rural road leading to the swamps. A notebook with entries was found in the glove compartment, the last of which read, "Found contact. Meeting today, possibly direct descendant of Emil." The search for Johnson, like many others who disappeared in this area before her, yielded no results. Her research was published posthumously and sparked a new wave of interest in the story of the swamp cannibals. Many enthusiasts and journalists tried to continue her work, but no one achieved significant success. In our day, most of the swamps of the Mississippi Delta have been developed and settled. Tourist routes pass through areas that were once considered impassable. Local guides tell visitors the story of the LeClaire family as a creepy but long-gone legend, adding colorful details to enhance the effect. However, among the locals, there are still those who treat this story with superstitious fear. They don't let their children play outside at dusk, don't walk alone on remote trails, and avoid certain sections of the swamps, especially during the full moon. Blood doesn't disappear, say the old-timers. It only hides, to return stronger later. Official data shows that the area of the former Hungry Swamp still has an abnormally high percentage of missing persons, 3 times higher than the national average. Most disappearances are attributed to accidents related to the peculiarities of the terrain, but some cases remain unexplained. In 2020, a group of paranormal investigators installed night vision cameras in the area where the LeClaire settlement was supposed to have been located. Most of the recordings showed nothing unusual, but one of the videos, taken around midnight, shows a tall figure moving between the trees with unnatural smoothness. Video analysis experts could not agree on the authenticity of the recording. In the same year, A construction company conducting excavation work for a new residential complex in the suburbs of the city discovered a mass grave dating back to approximately the early 20th century. The remains showed signs of cannibalism. Characteristic traces of meat removal and butchering were found on the bones. The official investigation linked this find to the activities of the Leclerc family, suggesting that it was one of their hunting grounds. In recent years, there have been reports of a new disturbing trend: the disappearance of homeless and marginalized people in the cities around the Mississippi Delta. Because such people often do not have a permanent place of residence or connections, their disappearance rarely attracts the attention of the authorities. However, public organizations working with the homeless note an unusually high percentage of disappearances, especially in the winter months. "They come to the shelters in vans," said one former homeless man in an anonymous interview. "They offer work on farms in the Delta, good pay and a roof over your head." Many agree, especially when it's cold, but none of them come back. No one asks about them, they just disappear. Police investigated several such cases, but found no evidence of a crime. The vans and their owners turned out to be legal carriers of seasonal workers. All the documents were in order. However, none of the missing were ever found, neither on the farms nor anywhere else. The current county sheriff, James Riley, is skeptical of the connection between modern disappearances and the Leclerc story. "It's an old legend that grows with new details with each generation," he says. "People love scary stories, especially if they happen near them, but the reality is much more prosaic. The swamps are dangerous and always have been." However, in his private office, Sheriff Riley keeps a map of the county on which all unexplained disappearances over the past 50 years are marked. If you connect these dots, they form a figure resembling the letter L with an additional line, a symbol that the Leclercs used to mark their terrible product. The story of the Leclerc family, the swamp cannibals of the Mississippi Delta, remains one of the darkest chapters in the history of the American South. More than a century has passed since their crimes were revealed, but the shadow of these events still hangs over the region. Every incomprehensible sound in the night swamp, every unexplained disappearance evokes whispers about the return of the ancient horror. Documents of that time continue to hold their secrets. Many investigation materials remain classified. Many testimonies have never been made public. Details that would shed new light on this story may be hidden in private collections and closed archives. And what if Jacques Leclerc was right? What if the blood of his family really spread throughout the South, carrying with it an ancient hunger passed down from generation to generation? What if right now, as you listen to this story, somewhere in a quiet suburb or in the depths of the modern swamps, the descendants of the Leclercs are gathering for a family dinner, observing the traditions that their ancestors taught them? Perhaps, driving along the quiet roads of Mississippi, you will stop to eat at a roadside cafe, where you will be offered a specialty, meat of amazing tenderness and special flavor. And perhaps, while you enjoy the meal, someone will be watching you from the kitchen with a particularly assessing interest. After all, as Marie-Helene Leclerc told her children, hunger never dies. It only waits for its hour.